Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Inka Vat. Washington has said goodbye to its giant pandas and their 3-year-old cub. Atlanta will do the same next year, which will end the presence of pandas in the United States. What does this separation say about the state of the U.S. China relationship? And a warning, today's show may contain images viewers find too cute. With me to discuss this are Leonard Chao, National Tsinghua University Adjunct Professor, former Taiwan Ambassador to the Kingdom of eSwatini, and William Stanton, former American Institute in Taiwan Director and National Chengchi University Chair Professor. Ambassadors Chao and Stanton, very warm welcome to the show today.
Thank you.
While the gifting of pandas dates back to ancient China, more recently under the Chinese Communist Party, Russia and North Korea were the first to receive pandas as diplomatic gifts. As a Chinese national symbol, they were also the perfect gift in 1972 for the United States. During then U.S. President Richard Nixon's landmark visit to Beijing, First Lady Patricia Nixon told China's Premier Zhou Enlai that she loved pandas. 2 arrived in Washington within months. Here, you can see pandas gifted to Japan also in 1972. In the 1980s, China began leasing the pandas to countries with whom Beijing wanted to increase trade ties, according to an Oxford University study. The Nikkei estimates the lease and upkeep of each panda pair amounts to $1 million per year. Ambassador Stanton, so why have pandas in Washington come to symbolize, the U.S.-China relationship?
Well, of course, they were a gift to, in effect, response to Pat Nixon, the wife of Richard Nixon. And of course, he was one of the leaders of trying to establish a better relationship with China.
After breaking ties with Taiwan.
After breaking ties with Taiwan. And, you could say that's the beginning of all our troubles in a way. I never thought they were that valuable a gift, particularly after I learned that we were paying for them. They were in fact a lease, or maybe not at the start, but certainly thereafter we had to pay a yearly fee for them, and then the expensive upkeep for them. And I was disappointed the first time I ever went and saw them at the Washington Zoo, because they weren't very interesting to watch. I didn't find the big pandas sitting there and munching on bamboo all that interesting. So in a way, the fact that they're now gone, they're being taken back, I think is symptomatic of how troubled the relationship is between the U.S. and China.
We'll delve into that a little bit later on. Ambassador Zhao, tell us what you think of how Beijing's panda diplomacy works. What's the hidden power of pandas?
Well, okay. First, from the names of the 2 pandas given to Taiwan by Beijing, that one is named Tuan Tuan, while the other Yuan Yuan. I think it obviously is a double the characters of very familiar term for any China hand can know the meaning that Tuan Yuan. Tuan Yuan means a reunion. I think that refers to obviously the closer ties between the peoples of both sides of the Taiwan Strait. So I think that it might as well call it a very united front, strategy. Still, somehow I think it's working in a way that you can soften up the otherwise very serious, very hardened image of China to the Taiwanese people. Panda is, after all, it's for any kids and any adults. It's a symbol of the sense of tenderness, and I think that if you run a random, survey, that panda definitely is among the top of the list of the lovely animals by any people any age. So I think
completely non-threatening.
That's right.
Symbol,
that's
cultural symbol.
That's right.
Okay. And Ambassador Stanton, how about you? Why? I'll quote to you something that the China's ambassador to the U.S. in 2013, Cui Tiankai, said. Many people don't realize it, he said, but there are actually 2 Chinese ambassadors in Washington, me and the panda cub in the National Zoo.
I think that's an overstatement, an exaggeration. I don't think, while the people who went to the zoo, it was a novelty because we don't have pandas native to the United States. And giving one to Taiwan or the United States after giving them to Russia and North Korea it was a second best gift in a way.
But it is true to say that Americans have embraced the pandas. They've become sort of the star attractions. I understand that, you know, they're featured on, they've almost become an unofficial mascot for Washington itself. They're on the Metro cards, T-shirts, mugs, along the National Mall.
But that may change now. I think once they're gone, they're being returned. And one was already taken away when it got sick, and another had died. And it's interesting that the 5 babies that the pandas had, Tuan Yuan, they all died shortly after birth. So, you know, in a way, that's a symbol of the struggle that the relationship has had with the United States and China. We've had a troubled relationship all along. And the fact that they've now been taken back, I think, is also symptomatic. I wonder in the future if we'll still see pandas in subways and on placards. I don't think so.
It stands for something, but it's hardly as profound as people tend to believe that. Like, you know, you mentioned the ambassador mentioned the 2 ambassadors. I agree with Ambassador Stanton is worrying that it's over-exaggerating. How can you compare one, you know, former you know, official ambassador to an animal, symbol? So I think, but let's not politicize or exaggerate, expand the unnecessary meaning of one single animal. That's it. Yeah.
Okay, so returning back to the situation in the U.S., I want to ask you, you know, you did say that you thought that the fact that they are returning, that this might be a sign of U.S. China ties. So I just want to bring in what happened to one of the pandas, well, both of the pandas at Memphis Zoo. So earlier this year, one died, and then this sort of sparked lots of anger and suspicion on Chinese social media that they had been, this panda had been mistreated. And then, of course, there were images of the partner panda with sort of clumps of hair falling out, because actually that panda has a skin disease. And even though the Chinese sent scientists over to do an autopsy and to see, you know, what was the state of affairs there, this still couldn't override, you know, everything that had been unleashed there in terms of the anti-American rhetoric. William?
Well, I think it's symptomatic of the degree to which the Chinese government, through its propaganda, predisposes people to take a negative attitude toward the United States. I mean, the last thing in the world the U.S. wanted was to have the pandas get sick. But we also have to remember, from the very beginning, it was supposed to be a gift, but later on I learned that we were leasing these animals, and other countries were leasing them, so you had to pay to get them. So I think that's also symptomatic of the nature of the relationship we've had between the United States and China. Nothing's free.
Right, yeah.
You have to pay in some way.
Yeah, and even sort of, if we're talking about China's soft power, essentially other countries are paying for that soft power.
Yeah.
Right. Ambassador Zhao, finally, so what message, what we understand is that China is recalling the pandas. That seems to be from some of the coverage, although nothing explicit has been said. Do you believe that China is sending a message? Or do you believe that actually it's different nations that no longer want to keep paying for the pandas?
Well, I think that I would not tend to believe that it's kind of any political meaning for the timing of this returning the panda back to China, whatsoever. Maybe there's something behind the scene. I think Australia, has sent a lot of koala to many countries, as a symbol of our friendship. So I think, why do we have to single out the panda, make a big deal out of that? I think it's a little exaggerated.
Okay, thank you. From the fate of pandas to that of Taiwan, my next guest argues that it's Chinese nationalistic fervour rather than the plans of Xi Jinping that would trigger any Taiwan crisis. Tong Zhao is a senior fellow at the China Center at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. I spoke to him earlier.
Mr. Xi perhaps has no specific timetable to achieve unification. However, because of this internal echo chamber, everyone in the system understands that Mr. Xi wants to make progress on the unification issue in the foreseeable future. He seems to have a sense of historical mission to promote progress on unification as a precondition for achieving the Chinese dream of national rejuvenation. As a result, everyone in the system feels a strong pressure or motivation to amplify that vision. And policy experts, public opinion leaders, they all advocate for policies that would help achieve coercive unification, because people understand that voluntary unification is increasingly unlikely. So that the system is being mobilized already across the board to prepare for that eventuality of a major military confrontation across the Taiwan Strait. So the risk is when the system becomes increasingly ready for that scenario, the willingness for the leadership to consider military option would also increase.
You also say that with a deeper understanding of what is going on within China, the United States could take the opportunity to stop this trend. How is the best way for them to do that?
Well, of course, to fundamentally change this situation requires China's internal reflection. But I think the international community, including the United States, can also play some role to contain the negative impact of China's echo chamber. On the issue of Taiwan, for example, the Chinese policy elites, they are genuinely convinced that according to contemporary international law and international norms, China has every right to take whatever operation against Taiwan, including military operation. However, I don't think that view is supported by empirical evidence. In fact, if we look at other contemporary examples of how the UK deals with Scotland's demand for independence and how the Canadian central government dealt with the request of Quebec to become independent, we can, have an honest debate with Chinese experts. The academic and expert community can have a substantive discussion and debate with their Chinese counterparts to raise question about their firmly held beliefs. I think that's one way to expose the Chinese policy leads to different perspectives and to stimulate some internal debate within the system that would challenge the premise of Chinese thinking on the issue of Taiwan.
That was Tong Zhao of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace speaking with me about the forces he says Xi Jinping has unleashed but cannot control. Ambassador Stanton, do you see any merit in Tong Zhao's argument?
Well, I think it's difficult to say that there's anything that Xi Jinping does not control inside China. He has so much power now that he's accrued. He's got a lifetime commitment. He's going to remain the leader of China till he dies. So I think to say that there's any limitations imposed by public opinion, to the extent there's public opinion, it's public opinion that's been whipped up by Chinese propaganda, news, and by the attitudes of the leadership, which direct the way people think about the United States. So, by definition, if it's, Xi Jinping, he says, can't control them, I think it's contradictory from what we understand about Xi Jinping. He is the boss.
Okay. Ambassador Zhao.
I think, I agree with Mr. Stanton mentioned that, there's no force in China that she cannot control. She has to control. Okay, she's trying, to his best, because after all, he's the chairman of the military commission within the party machine. So, and let alone the recent examples of some of the leadership, change of the missile, missile division of the PLA.
Ambassador Zhao, let's go into one of the things that Tong Zhao says that might help the situation. He thinks that if Western analysts were more willing to engage with their Chinese counterparts, who he says that would be very willing to engage on the issue of Taiwan, that maybe, that opinion and approach on Taiwan could be changed.
I don't know what Mr. Zhao, is meaning by, saying that the engage the Western, scholars with the Chinese scholars. Can you mix the water and oil? It's a good practice to begin with. Okay, some exchange of opinions always a healthy. Healthy way to kind of to narrow down the understanding gap between the two kinds of scholars in both countries. But if you say that can reach a certain result for kind of reducing or terminating the mutual misunderstanding, I think that was a little bit too much to predict.
Ambassador Stanton.
I'll say that I've never met any American academics or scholars who didn't want to engage with their Chinese counterparts. They do it to the extent they are able to all the time. Indeed, when I was stationed in Beijing, I used to meet with academics and scholars on the basis that they would be easier to talk to than government officials. We were encouraged to do it, but I never heard any of them give me a line of argument that was any different from their governments. So I'm not sure, I think the parameters within which Chinese academics work is much narrower than for American scholars.
So, Ambassador Stanton, just digging a bit deeper, Tong Zhao says, instead of relying solely on deterrence, the United States and other governments should craft their messaging and policies with the aim of disrupting the internal feedback loop, which is basically braying for war against the US because they believe that the US poses an existential threat to China.
Well, over the past year, the US has been making every effort to re-engage with the Chinese. I'm not so sure that was wise running after them. After all, the recent real decline began when the Chinese had a weather balloon, which was actually a spy balloon, float over the United States.
But I think that afterwards, the US government came out and said that they didn't find evidence that it had been spying.
It didn't have evidence that it collected intelligence, but it was geared to do that. But there was no evidence that it had done so. But nonetheless, that was the cause of the problem. And it's the U.S., Jake Sullivan, Tony Blinken have been making efforts to engage with the Chinese meeting between President Biden and Chairman Xi Jinping. So the U.S. has been doing whatever it can to show it wants to engage. Some critics in the United States have said, it's not the right approach to go running after the Chinese. So, in the United States, where everyone has an opinion, you both win and you lose no matter what you do. So I think the U.S. has shown that it's willing to engage with China and has been doing so. There was also the Secretary of Commerce visited. There have been other visits. But there are certain things, I think the U.S. over the years has learned there's only a certain degree to which you can accommodate China. Otherwise, in a sense, we often don't get anything in return for that.
Let's take a look now at a recent event. The US's top military general, Charles Brown, said he doubts that China wants to invade Taiwan. Let's take a look at what he told reporters. He said, I do think that Chinese President Xi Jinping doesn't actually want to take Taiwan by force. He will try to use other ways to do this. And that was, of course, Chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Charles Brown. Ambassador Zhao, what do you make of that? How different is this statement to what's come before from the U.S. military?
Well, as a matter of fact, this kind of statement comes from, General Charles Brown is not the first ranking U.S. official to say that. As a matter of fact, if you look at what happened last year, in November last year, right after the summit, the G20 summit in the Bali Island, was a 3 hours long talk meeting between Xi and Biden. Yeah. And after that, out of the conference and and Biden said in public that, from his conversation with Xi, and he tend to believe that China is not willing to invade Taiwan. And yes, we hope that now that we have the words from General Brown, I think it's consolidate the meaning of the reality, and hopefully I believe that that can somehow soothe or diffuse any rumor coming out in the past few years, like what year is going to be war in Taiwan Strait. And like the economist, like a crystal ball telling, okay, that's a contact between which year, 24, 24. I think I have to believe that it's not helpful, to any side.
Okay. Ambassador Stanton.
I agree with the ambassador that I think it would be best if military leaders in the United States would stop making predictions about where or when or how there might be an attack on Taiwan. I think more important, they would put their efforts in trying to show stronger support to build up the strength of Taiwan in the event of an attack.
But do you think that this is what Charles Brown has said is different? I mean, Ambassador Zhao thinks it's not.
It's somewhat different, but the different people in the military have expressed the view, there's a direct invasion, but there are other scenarios. There's a blockade, there's an embargo. There are other measures they can take which are coercive against Taiwan, but not necessarily an outright attack, and that would force Taiwan to have to give up and surrender. So I agree, it's just not helpful to talk about dates. And I think that actually there's, you can read his remarks in two ways. One way would be, they're not likely. They don't want to have to invade and kill thousands or tens of thousands of Chinese, as somebody at the Chinese Institute for Contemporary International Relations once told me. He said, well, Chinese don't kill Chinese. Well, I hope so. But there are other ways they might be thinking, and actually his remarks could be interpreted, well, there won't be an outright attack, but there might be other things they would do. So I just wish most people in leadership positions in the United States would stop making predictions and these kind of big statements about what's going to happen. I would rather see them put all their efforts into supporting Taiwan.
Do you agree with Ambassador Zhao that it's kind of maybe an attempt to tone down the rhetoric?
May be.
Yeah, and if so, why now?
It may be because the overall strategy is the U.S. government is to cool the temperature. It doesn't help to always be, talking about war and the potential for war. So, the U.S. government has been making great efforts over the past year, I would say, to smooth things over and to calm things down. So that makes sense that maybe that's what he means by this.
Ambassador Zhao, let me throw something in, final question, a little bit different. Or is it reflective actually of China's own changed fortunes? The fact that it is looking now at an economic downturn, there doesn't seem to have been a bounce back. The demographic crisis, the unrelenting trade war, tech war between the US and China, and of course, what many people are starting to talk more about is the breakdown of that social contract between the people and the CCP, which is that they can rest assured that their lives will be made better if they don't attempt to engage in politics.
I think the war in Ukraine is not over, and now there is another crisis in the Gaza Strip, in the Middle East, between the Israelis and Hamas. So I think the U.S. got their hands full, and so they need some quieter and more peaceful international international development. So I think both are in need of some tension easing, kind of to a resting moment. I think both, Biden and Xi, they are in need of this kind of privilege, because Biden, as you say, on the Biden side, we know though very well the U.S. election cycle is kicking off. Now Biden is suffering some of the re-election, pressure. He's trying to make himself more popular, okay, at home and externally. The Xi Jinping side, Xi Jinping, as you mentioned earlier, that he is in great pressure, domestically, politically, economically, socially, and militarily. Okay, so I think he cannot afford. He cannot afford to run another risk overseas. The U.S. China tension is not helping him. So that's this time. Okay, for some time in the past, that U.S. seems more desperate to reach rapprochement or peaceful meeting with Xi, and China is kind of we're not that desperate. But now China is equally desperate. I think both are in need of this kind of a kind of a new peaceful result.
Okay.
And they can benefit. They hope they can benefit from this kind of a result.
And the whole world as well.
Right, yeah.
We're going to have to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Leonard Chao and William Stanton, for joining Taiwan Talks today.
All right, thank you.
If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.